Sam, one of my favorite things to do is to do a little bit of deep research. It's kind of like the podcast version of This Is Your Life. In this case, I will admit, I got a little bit of help from Perplexity AI. So how do you see your research from back then relating to what's happening with AI today?
Wow.
And then after you answer that, I want you to grade the question from Perplexity.
That's beautiful.
Welcome to the GeekWire podcast. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop. This episode is part of a collaboration between the GeekWire podcast and Me, Myself, and AI. That's a podcast from MIT Sloan Management Review that explores the future of artificial intelligence. I connected a few months ago with the show's producer, Allison Ryder, and its host, Sam Ransbotham. And on this episode, I get to compare notes with Sam, who's a professor of analytics at Boston College, who's been researching data, analytics, and AI at MIT Sloan Management Review for more than a decade. Sam and I share takeaways from our podcasts and our own observations on some of the emerging trends and long-term implications of AI. This is part of a two-part series across our two podcasts. If you want to hear more after you're done listening here, look for Me, Myself, and AI from MIT Sloan Management Review for the rest of our conversation. You can also find a link in the show notes on this episode of the GeekWire podcast. I started by asking Sam to give us the basics on their show. How would you describe, for people who haven't listened to it, the ethos of your show and the goal? What are you hoping that listeners to Me, Myself, and AI, by the way, whenever I mention the name Me, Myself, and AI, everybody in the GeekWire offices goes, brilliant. But what are you hoping people take away from your episodes?
Well, actually, right now, I'd like to say that I completely alone came up with that title. That is so not true. When Allison and the production team suggested it, I thought, wow, that's a great title. So I'd like to take credit for it, but I didn't. What we're trying to do is figure out what's really happening. We hope that we can bring our listeners a source of signal with a whole lot of noise that's going on. There's a lot of hype about artificial intelligence. There's a lot of naysaying about artificial intelligence. And somewhere between those, there is some signal and some truth. And to the degree that we can talk to people about what they're really doing, to the degree that we can push past the sort of corporate veneer about what they're doing to find out what the people are doing and how they're working with the technology that none of us have ever worked with before. And it's fascinating.
Where are you in all of this? Like, as you're talking to these people, do you end up being more pessimistic or optimistic about the light side to win over the dark side? Not to use a Star Wars analogy, but where are you? Where do you end up on all this?
I have strong convictions weakly held. It seems like every the last person I talk to, I get excited about whatever their position is. We had people from Amnesty International talking about some of the downsides of the tracking technology, and I was, oh gosh, yes, that resonated with me. But then I talked to other people, and you get excited about the opportunity. I mean, you had this on your episode, and I'll point to, for example, the Box episode, talking about how much data that they have within their infrastructure and the ability to extract information from it. I mean, I think you're talking to the CEO, Aaron Levy, if I remember right. That opportunity to work with our data is a tremendous opportunity that we've never had before. So depending on who I talk to, I tend to, if you want to sway me, you can just pick a position and sway me. I'm ephemeral.
Sam, one of my favorite things to do is to do a little bit of deep research. And it's kind of like the podcast version of This Is Your Life. So in this case, I will admit, I got a little bit of help from Perplexity AI. And I went back and tried to find some of your research reports from, actually more than a decade ago. And one of the ones I found was from 2012. And I was trying to connect it. This might have been a little forced, but I'm going to do it anyway. So here is the question, after all this research and querying that I did with Perplexity, that Perplexity proposed. I ask you, are you ready for it?
Oh, gosh.
Your research from 2012 said that the way people connect and stay involved in online communities shapes the value and the creativity that those communities create. First off, is that a premise?
That's a premise,
an accurate
yes.
premise?
Mm-hmm.
That's true?
Yeah.
Okay. So now when you look at AI, these systems, they're learning from these huge networks of human-generated content. So how do you see your research from back then relating to what's happening with AI today?
Wow.
And then after you answer that, I want you to grade the question from Perplexity.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I think what Perplexity or you're talking about is that we did a lot of research back. I was excited about Wikipedia. Wikipedia is fascinating. And actually, I could talk about Wikipedia for a long time. I think there's so many aspects that are fascinating, but you can think about it as a community, as people working together to create a product, and they're working together in an open way without compensation or with very little compensation to create something that's truly amazing. And it has a lot of societal implications. But what we were looking at, and I think in the study you were mentioning, is we modeled Wikipedia as a network, kind of like a social network. Like how do editors bring information from one article to another? How does that information flow through a set of information in Wikipedia? And there's some fascinating dynamics, I think, that go on, both in terms of, and you tried to pull this into a current analogy. One of the things we found was that new people had new information, and it may not be information that sticks, but it shapes the community. It shapes the artifact.
It's Todd jumping in here after the fact to note that on November 10th, after Sam and I recorded this episode, the Wikimedia Foundation, the nonprofit behind Wikipedia, published a post that echoed many of these points, including the dependence of AI on human knowledge and networks, and the need for AI developers who train their models on Wikipedia to do so responsibly by giving proper attribution and providing financial support to ensure Wikipedia's sustainability. Returning now to our conversation, Sam built on these themes to make a broader point.
One of the things that happened when Wikipedia arrived, before there was Encyclopedia Britannica. It was a company, it had employees, it produced books, it paid a printer, it created economic value. And if you look in the GDP, you look at the gross domestic product, how much of America produced in the era of Encyclopedia Britannica, we could measure something. Wikipedia came along, and Encyclopedia Britannica didn't last. It's now no longer with us. And so, in fact, GDP dropped. But would any rational person say that the world is a worse place because we now have Wikipedia versus Encyclopedia Britannica? And I'm not throwing any shade on Encyclopedia Britannica. I had a set on my desk growing up, and I wish I remembered more of them. But the point here is that measurement has become a big problem. And so when Wikipedia came along, we didn't have a great way of measuring what value that's creating in society. We have the same sort of thing going on with artificial intelligence. I mean, you've talked about, in your episode with Box, that the data gives better insights about what you're doing, about the documents you have. You can make a slightly better decision. How do you measure that? When you're talking to the folks from AI First, they were talking about their book about how these technologies are able to create value in organizations, but a lot of that may not be able to measure well. So we've got some fundamental shifts in how we're thinking about these things, and I find that interesting as well. So if we talk about the analogies back where you started this question with what's happened since 2012 that still applies, I think we've got questions about how we measure and create value, about how we work together, about how openness works versus closeness. These are some enduring things that I hope we can learn from. Just because we haven't learned from artificial intelligence before, we do have some analogies we can learn from.
Coming up next, Sam and I talk about the areas where we're personally seeing value from AI. One of the questions that you ask guests occasionally at the end of your episodes, more of a rapid fire thing. You've got a set of them, but I know one of them is, what's the best use of AI so far for you personally? So Sam, I wanted to throw that back at you.
Oh man.
Is there a particular application of AI that is most useful to you?
We talk a lot about generation and the generational capabilities, what these things can create. I find myself using it far more for what it can summarize, what it can distill. And, that's not a sort of, maybe you're thinking about just a one-off use or whatever, but in general, we're all constrained by time. We all have 24 hours a day. And how do we get more information in to those 24 hours is a huge thing. And if we can use these tools to summarize more than generate, that's my one gotta have it feature.
I love that. I also use it for insight that I would have zero chance of having otherwise. And I'll give you my favorite example. This is how I was going to answer it if you asked me this question. I was ready for you. I was ready for your quick questions. I love when I go to the auto mechanic to take the invoice and the estimate that I would otherwise completely not understand, snap a picture, upload it to ChatGPT or Gemini, whatever I happen to be using that week, have it explain it to me, have it tell me whether the prices are reasonable in my city. And let me tell you, in Seattle, at least they're not. And then also tell me what to ask.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is like, I like that example in part because you can have that kind of conversation with anybody. It's not just the heavy duty enterprise user looking for, the latest insights into some CRM or something like that. It's like, this is my car and this is this thing that I would not otherwise understand. So that's my favorite use case. And if they took that away from me, I would feel like I was a lesser human for the lack of the AI in my life.
I love that. Let's push it a little more proactively though. Like one of the things, I'm not really big into NASCAR, but I watch those people driving those cars, and when they get in their car, they have a 5-point harness. It's like a helmet, and then they have a harness that attaches all kinds of different places. But when I get in my car, I have a 3-point harness and no helmet. And so what I wonder is, what do they know that I don't know? Like they must know something about the risks and it may be perfectly fine that I'm in a 3-point harness versus a 5-point harness. I don't know. But the point...
They know how to drive 200 miles an hour is probably
and
the
I
answer.
do. I think, as my family will attest, I get distracted and drive too slow. I get excited about what I'm looking at and I'm creeping along. I'm quite the opposite. But my point there is that there is one thing that I could do in the car that would make me safer. One incremental step that I could make. And I don't know what that step is. And so where I'm going with this is, in any given minute of your life, there's one optimal way to spend that minute. What is the one thing that would be helpful for you to learn? When you're sitting there at the auto mechanic looking at the bill, in that minute, it's what does this bill, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. We got that on-demand ability to learn. Now, we could expand that throughout in many other places. And it doesn't have to be sort of, your analogy was a reactive. You got a bill and you had to deal with it. So you on demand got information, which it happens because you didn't know that was going to happen. And you wouldn't want to have learned about all of auto mechanics just to handle this bill. So you can get exactly what you needed. But in other times, I think that there's opportunities about what we know. What's limiting us? What's the one thing that's holding us back? I mean, you had the Mark Briggs on. I think he's a productivity executive coach person, and what resonated with me about that was this idea of individual use of these technologies. These technologies are very individual. I mean, there are certainly many corporate uses, but even the corporate uses are often individual uses as well. They're not totally, but many of them are. What is the one thing that we could do in the next 1 minute? And I'm hoping, for our listeners, it's listening to this podcast, but what's the one thing that we could make the most productive use of our time? Global, in a global sense. I'm kind of fascinated by that.
I keep getting stuck on something lately that is actually completely counter to that, Sam.
Oh, no,
I'm not
good.
Gonna take
Let's
it
argue.
Yeah. I was speaking at the Fremont Chamber of Commerce, the Fremont Seattle Chamber of Commerce. They had a session on AI in business and how to use it. And I love those kinds of conversations because these are not necessarily tech people. They're people who are interested in it. And one of the people challenged the entire premise of the event.
Good.
She stood up and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was, the question shouldn't be how can we be more productive in our businesses? And to your point about what can we do in the next minute, it was how can we be more human in the midst of all this? And one of her points was, and maybe this undermines the entire premise of our two podcasts. One of her points was, you're not going to find it in AI. You're going to find it in yourself and in pausing and not using these tools. And I've been struggling with that. I've been wrestling with it personally ever since, and not in a very overt way, but just it's been in the back of my mind. Like, I'm doing more and more, and I actually am. I feel in my job. I'll be honest with you. I feel like in the past 2 years, I can point to some stories in particular on the site where I never would have been able to do stories at that level without the insights and the assistance of AI. And I wouldn't have been able to do as many because the productivity would not have been there. Mm-hmm. But am I a better person for it? I don't mean to get existential on you, but where are you on that?
Well, actually, one of the questions that you mentioned, our rapid fire, we tend to have a set of rapid fire questions, and they come from a curated list of a couple of dozen that we've put together, and we don't always ask every question. But one of the ones that we're always thinking about is, when you're using artificial intelligence, is it making you spend more or less time with technology? So let me push that to you. I mean, it sounded like it's maybe making you spend more time with technology.
100%, 150%. I mean, I feel like, and it's back to the conversation that we keep referencing with Aaron Levy, which apparently is some kind of landmark episode in the GeekWire podcast based on the number of times I cite it. The more you realize you can do, the more potential you see, and the more capabilities that these tools unlock. At least for me, I'm just speaking from my own personal experience, I'm using it more and more and more. And this gets into some of the issues that you talked about with Angela Nakalembe from YouTube, and the whole notion of, is this sustainable? Is there going to be the computing that's there in the long term? And I worry sometimes that I'm using it too much and that I'm becoming dependent on it. And maybe we'll enter this dystopian new reality in the future where it won't be available to me. And in that state, what will I become?
Yeah. No, I mean, it's something to think about. I mean, we are certainly dependent on technology, but we're depending on a lot of things in society. I mean, I don't.
Yes.
This is one example that are tons of infrastructure that we're depending on, and a lot of that infrastructure then depends on technology. But we are all connected in ways that are complicated to understand. But when I asked the question about, well, what's the next best way to spend my minute? I think maybe you and I both jumped to the idea that next minute should be like learning something through AI or using the tool. I mean, maybe one of the answers is, no, that next minute would be something very human or something completely. So I think if we just open up that question a little bit to allow ourselves a broader answer, then maybe the answer still holds. It's just we have to think about how it could respond better. Now, I'm not sure, given current technologies, if they would ever suggest turning off that tool. And that gets into some of the things you and I have worried about in terms of the tech oligopolies that are out there that have so much control of data and so much control of these algorithms, to the degree they have a huge influence on our lives, by proxy, these organizations have a huge effect on our lives. And I think, if you want to worry about something, that's something to worry about.
You mentioned that conversation with Mark Briggs. I really think this really resonates with me, that one of the ideas he has as an executive coach is to help people set personal goals that will be kind of the residue of them succeeding in their business goals. And he uses the example of date night. Mm-hmm. If somebody in their relationship can get back to having date nights, that means that they've been using the tools effectively. And so maybe the ultimate answer here is that if the tools and the AI can get us to a point where we have more space to be human, then we'll all be better off for it. And I appreciate what you said about the fact that we're all relying on this infrastructure, because I mean, I'm about to go out and get in my car and drive to the Bay Area this afternoon. And, if not for that, I'd apparently be in my horse and buggy and
Right. There are tons of technologies that we are, in fact, relying on. We're relying on other people in this society as well.
Next up, the impact of AI in the startup ecosystem and the college classroom.
You're so immersed in the startup scene there. What are you seeing in terms of the effect of the artificial intelligence usage on startups. I mean, as a precursor, what I'm hearing is, it lets me get a marketing plan together really quickly or avoid hiring people. Is that the right way to take that?
I think we're seeing new startups that we would not have seen otherwise because people are able to take an idea and turn it into something real so much faster. That to me is probably the biggest impact of AI so far. I'd say, half of the startups we're talking with would not exist, not only because they're focused on AI and maybe they're even producing AI-related technology, but also because they're able to do things with less money, with fewer people than they could have otherwise. And I think it's emboldening a lot of people to take that bet. And that's got to be good, right? That's got to be good.
More ideas are always better. To the degree that we can make it, cheaper to get ideas out there, that doesn't mean that every idea is good. There's a certain benefit to having an ROI on an idea. Otherwise, we don't get a lot of low value ideas, but we also don't get a lot of lottery tickets on big ideas that might come out. And if these technologies let people take an idea and explode it, that seems big. And one of the things that actually makes me think about is when you were talking with Henson Hussein, the documentary filmmaker, he was talking about making an Oscar-winning film with a very limited resources. We had Ty Sheridan, who was in Ready Player One, on our episode, and he's starting up a company doing the similar sort of idea, which is take what used to be expensive technologies, strip those away, and leave the idea. That seems very appealing to me.
100%. I am very much taken by this notion of the individual creator becoming kind of a studio unto himself or herself. You're catching me here. I'm in Northern California this week in my hometown, and I've been here the past couple weeks. And every once in a while, I'll come down, and I am a volunteer for the local newspaper here, the print newspaper, which does not have an online website. It's called the Sacramento Valley Mirror, and I've been filling in for the publisher who's been out for a couple weeks. And just the ability to produce basic newspaper content just like that, it reminds me a lot of what Hanson is able to do. I picked up a flyer yesterday for the Orland, California churchwide bazaar, and it's coming up in a couple weeks. And you would have handed that to an intern at the newspaper and had that person type it up for 10 minutes or whatever, get it into AP style and move on. And I snapped it on my phone, uploaded, and said, write this up. And it was waiting for me, 4 paragraphs to send into the newspaper, not under my byline. We're careful about that, but, just that ability to produce content and do work, it's exciting to me. I don't know if that directly addressed what you were saying, Sam, but it's on my mind.
So is that content that it produced, is it good?
Yes. That kind of finite, just turn this flyer into a 3-paragraph news blurb. Yes, that's well within the capabilities of the AI to do cleanly. Maybe not a year ago, but definitely now. So Sam, in addition to being a researcher and a podcast host, you also are a professor of analytics at Boston College, and so you're interacting with students. I'm wondering, when you talk to students about AI at Boston College and when you see how they use it, do you walk away with insights that are different than those that you might experience yourself or that you might get from some of the industry professionals that you interview on your show?
Certainly, it's different. There's something so beautiful about a college atmosphere. People are excited about learning. The reason that they're there, their job is to learn. Whereas in the corporate world, that isn't necessarily true. That they can't be so focused on learning, and that's pretty exciting. And it both excites and terrifies me. Like everything else we've talked about, there are pros and cons of each one of these. It's really amazing what some students are able to create and accomplish using these tools. They're able to learn more and get more out of these tools and do amazing things. At the same time, I see the vestiges of a worrying trend of phoning things into the machine. And between those two, I think these technologies have the ability, for example, to make us all, work together and more even and bring up the what used to be a digital divide to link it. But instead, I'm seeing almost the ability, the opposite, which is an increasing digital divide. And the divide is not so much, we used to think about it in terms of maybe a socioeconomic divide, and I'm sure that's still there. I mean, one of the things that we've done at Boston College is that we provide premier tools to all of our students as part of being here at no cost, because we're trying very hard to make sure that economically, socioeconomics are not the differentiator in the classroom. And I think that's a pretty important principle. But even beyond that, I worry about a dividend to technology interest. And so the deeper that someone is able to understand tools and technology, the more that they're able to get out of those tools. Meaning that a cursory usage of a tool will get a cursory result, and a deeper use will get a deeper result. And I'm not saying that everybody has to produce every possible content with Oscar-winning performance like Hussein was talking about. I mean, they don't all have to be that way. Every article on the Church Bazaar doesn't have to be Pulitzer Prize winning. That's not exactly what I'm saying, but I am worried that the ability to get to average is hamstringing a lot of abilities with students as they're trying to learn, because it is easier to get to average. And if that's your goal, which it shouldn't be, then you're going to be hamstrung. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of that in the educational system. That's
really interesting. It's kind of a little bit of a race to the bottom in some ways.
Let's call it a race to mediocre. That if mediocre is what you're shooting for, then it's really quick to get to mediocre. But often mediocre is often not the goal. And one of the things I say here at Boston College, our motto is ever to excel. It's not ever to mediocre. And, to the ability of students to get to excellence can be hampered by their ease of getting to mediocre.
I don't want to end our show on that note. What makes you optimistic?
Oh, it's just amazing what people can do with these tools. It's amazing the kinds of things you even mentioned earlier when you're talking about using these tools. And often I find that the tool is completely wrong and ridiculous. And it says just absolute garbage. But that garbage sparks me to think about something. Like the way that it's wrong pushes me to think about, well, why is that wrong? Why is that such a fundamentally bad thing for it to have generated? And how can I push on that? I think that the ability for these tools to push us, if we just don't sort of ask the question, paste the response into something, is going to be a differentiator going forward when we use these tools, even if they're wrong, to get value.
It's what we bring to it, not just what we get out of it.
And we bring things through technical learning, for example. I teach a class of machine learning. The people who really engage and understand the models end up using the tools better to create better models. And so, it builds off of that. If you understand how things work, you're going to get a better result.
I've been talking with Sam Ransbotham. He's a professor of analytics at Boston College, and he's the host of Me, Myself, and AI, a podcast from MIT Sloan Management Review. This is part of a 2-episode pair. You can also hear the rest of our conversation by going to the Me, Myself, and AI feed and listening to everything else that Sam and I talked about. Sam, this has been really fun. Thanks for joining me.
Great. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening. I'm GeekWire co-founder Todd Bishop, and we'll be back next week with a new episode of the GeekWire podcast.